You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Kevin Mitnick, who is largely a self-taught expert in exposing the vulnerabilities of complex operating systems and telecommunications advice. He is what we would call a hacker, or former hacker, and probably one of the most famous ones in the world. Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Doug. It's a pleasure to be on your show, so far away. I'm in Las Vegas, and you're thousands of miles away over the pond, but great to be here.
You've been described, or certainly in the past, as America's most wanted hacker. You've hacked into everything in the world. What motivated you to get started into doing that?
It was all about fascination and intellectual curiosity, challenge, the seduction of adventure, and kind of what brought me into hacking was my fascination as a young boy into magic. When I was a young kid, I used to ride my bicycle over to the magic store and just sit there all day on the weekends to learn the secrets to the tricks that they were demonstrating for the customers. And eventually, when I became a high school student, I met this kid who could work magic with the telephone. And he was able to do all these tricks, like he could have me call on a telephone number and he'd call in another telephone number and we'd be magically joined. He can get anybody's unlisted number. Or if he had a phone number, like I gave him my mom's number, and at the time he was able to tell me the name the phone was listed in and the address. Wow. And what was really cool is he gave me this phone number that you called, and when you called it, it gave a weird tone. You'd put in a 5-digit code, and you can call anywhere in the world for free. And I go, hey, what is this? His name was Steve. I go, what's this thing? And he goes, it's a fluke with the phone company. And he showed me all these tricks he could do with the phone company, and I basically became hooked, and I got involved in this hobby called phone phreaking, and it's kind of the same hobby that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak involved themselves in the mid-'70s. This is when they were building these things called blue boxes, and blue boxes are these devices that emit certain tones. When you press a touch tone on your telephone, it has a certain frequency. Well, think of this blue box as it had the same type of tones but different frequencies that would control the phone system. So Steve Wozniak actually built the box, and I think Steve Jobs was actually selling them on Berkeley's campus so people could make free phone calls. And actually they earned enough money to buy the boards to build the first Apple I by actually phone phreaking. So this hobby of phone phreaking is what actually brought me into computer hacking, because I was so fascinated by it and it was so interesting that when the phone companies started moving over to computerized systems, I wanted to get control of the computers so basically I could pull pranks on friends. I was kind of this prankster and this phone phreaker, and this was like my foot in the door of computer hacking.
Was it difficult at the time to do this?
It was a lot different than it is today. Today you can go to websites that are out there. There's a whole community of hackers, and they share exploit code, they share tools. None of this was available, back when I started. I started hacking before the first IBM PC was out on the market. I started in 78, and I think the first IBM PC was out in 80. The Apple was out, though. The Apple was out by that time. And the kind of stuff I used to do is I would hack into a telephone company switch of that controlled a friend's telephone service at home, and what I would do is I'd change the class of service to a payphone, so whenever he or his parents try to make a call, it would say, please deposit 25 cents. Right? And then my friend would call me all pissed off, change it back, what are you doing? My parents are going to be pissed, and then I would change it to a prison payphone. So now it would say, you can only make collect call, sir. And so this is the type of stuff I used to do, kind of, what really brought me into this this hacking was really my fascination with the telephones and manipulating the phone system. And that's kind of what led me on this path.
So the people today who are hacking into computers, are they the dangerous terrorists and criminals like in the movies, or are they more likely to be curious teenagers looking to explore?
Well, I think there's both. I think a lot of the hacking today is for profit, and it's not, and which is different from the old school hacking, which was mainly for the curiosity and the challenge. So a lot of so it's kind of the trend is that most of the bad guys out there are doing really bad things by stealing credit card numbers, stealing identities, stealing bank accounts. But there are still some people out there that are probably old school, that are doing it for the same reasons I did it. I did it, which was seduction of adventure, challenge and pursuit of knowledge.
So when you started doing this in the late 1970s, the computer systems were much easier, I assume, to get into, and they simply didn't have the defenses that we have today. A lot of people with the bigger systems, and this is really one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you on the Goldstein on Gelt show. This show is really a personal finance show, and my day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I do the radio gig once a week.
So I have a question. Should I buy Apple stock? No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, if we know where the original investment money came from perhaps illegal sales of blue boxes, I'm wondering maybe they should give it all back. Anyway, we'd like to believe that our money is safe and that our data is safe with these big companies that hire firms like your firm to check their security. How confident should we really be?
Well, it's kind of scary out there. I mean, I've been hired as an ethical hacker in many what we call penetration tests over the last 8 years, and pretty much in every penetration test, we're able to get either complete access to our client's computer network or access the confidential information. We're always able to find something. And now you have to think about the companies out there that are what we call the low-hanging fruit. They don't bother testing their security. They just have an internet presence, and they just hope that they're not going to be compromised. They feel confident, and then what happens? Something bad happens, and and it affects their corporate image. It causes potential significant losses of confidential information was exposed, or the integrity of the information was compromised. So so I think it's my advice is always to be proactive with security if you're a small, medium, or even a large business. And you don't want to be caught with your pants down.
Does that mean bringing in an ethical hacker, which is just, maybe you should define that term for our listeners, mean bringing someone like that in to see how vulnerable you really are?
Exactly. It's kind of a test, in a moment of time, is you want to know what your security posture is. And you'll never know unless you're tested. But then again, there's a lot of companies that offer these services, so you have to be really careful, because some of these companies just use what we call automated scanners, and what they'll do is they'll use these scanners to try to identify vulnerabilities, and they'll get the report, and they'll package up that report with their logo and their company and their brand, and they'll give it to the customer, which is kind of a disservice, because a lot of times these scanners find maybe 20% of the problems. And that's kind of what I pride my company on, is we really focus on manual assessments. So, our red team really goes out and focuses on finding all the vulnerabilities, but not relying on automated technologies. But we do use automated technologies in the beginning to look for the very low-hanging fruit.
So, a company hires you, you send in your red team. I don't know how much you're able to tell us, but what do they do?
Basically, it depends on the scope of the job. A lot of times corporations have deployed applications that are facing the internet. And a lot of these applications have potential security flaws. One of the number one security flaws is a thing called what we call SQL injection. And what that is, there's a programming language called structured query language that is used by programmers and applications to communicate with databases. And in some cases, when the application programmer is allowing, for example, users to input information into a form, and they're not validating that information should be valid, meaning that it should match very specific criteria, it may create a vulnerability that allows a hacker to input information that could be used to manipulate how the SQL programming language is working and compromise information in the back-end database or even the server itself.
So the hacker would have to want to be he would be interested in that company and watching for this opening and then jumping when the opportunity arises?
Well, case in point, I had a client approach me about 2 weeks ago, and the reason they were approached is Discover called them and said, you guys had a breach. And they go, what are you talking about? Well, we've discovered that, we have, hundreds of Discover customers had their credit card numbers abused, and the common point where these customers, did transactions was at your company. So they hired me to go in and do an investigation, and within very short order, I found that their entire credit card database of all their customers were stolen, and they used this hacking technique called SQL injection. And there's a lot of tools out there. You don't even have to be a really good hacker. You could purchase a tool to basically automate SQL injection attacks, and they were able to basically steal all of the information out of the database. So then I had to go in and explain the how, the when, and the where, and help them, deploy a security product to help repel those types of attacks, and also to help them fix their code. So it's a big problem, and there's not a day that goes by that you don't hear about a company getting hacked. And recently, I think Global Payments out of the eastern part of the United States was compromised, and millions of credit cards stolen, and it probably is related to some sort of vulnerability in an application that's facing the internet, because that's the most common point of attack, is really applications, wireless networks, and a thing called social engineering. And that's that's a subject that my first book, called Art of Deception, which was published in 2002, that's about a technique called social engineering, is where the hacker doesn't manipulate the technology in the beginning. They manipulate the human factor, the people that are using the technology, to comply with some sort of request that benefits the attacker. Like, for example, imagine you receive in your email a PDF file from a company that you do business with, like a vendor or a partner or whomever, and you open up that PDF file, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to you, that was a hacker that sent that PDF file, and the PDF file exploits a security vulnerability in Adobe Acrobat. Well, what the hacker did in this case is they simply went to LinkedIn. They looked for people in your company that probably have extended permissions, like even system administrator permissions. They did a lot of research, and they found business relationships between those people and vendors. And then what they did is they registered a domain, let's say the vendor in this case is Cisco. Let's say they registered a domain called cisco-support.com, which anybody could do.
Right.
Then they sent an email to the employee, to the target, pretending to be Cisco support, with a PDF file that talks about, maybe it speaks to, please look at this attachment. This is we found this vulnerability in some of the Cisco gear that the customer has that could affect productivity, or whatever excuse the hacker could come up with. The victim puts up the file, and the game is over.
That's amazing. We are talking with Kevin Mitnick, who is perhaps one of the world's most famous former hackers. He's been the subject of many, many newspaper articles and magazines. His autobiography was a New York Times bestseller. Kevin, we're just about out of time, but in the last few seconds, could you tell people how can they learn more about the work that you're doing?
Oh, sure. They can go to my website. My website is www.mitnicksecurity. That's MITN like Nancy, ICK, security.com. Also, my new autobiography was published on August 15th. It's a New York Times bestseller. The name of the autobiography is called Ghost in the Wires, and there's a website called ghostinthewires.com. So that is a good way to reach me, because you could look for the contact information on the website and send me an email. My personal email is Mitnick, MITNICK, @gmail.com.
Great. Kevin Mitnick, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.